Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Batwoman. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. It was an interesting episode. Obviously, we're dealing with a woman named DeWilla who basically 8 years ago carved up her face, because it seems like she has like a very, like, obviously body dysmorphia is already kind of a terrible thing, but it seems like she has an even more extreme version of, I mean, it's actually sad because basically the reason why she did it is because I think it's almost like she didn't like what she saw in the mirror, because what she saw in the mirror is what her mom wanted her to become, and she didn't like it because it's just like, basically it's kind of like she didn't like her face because of like her mom. It's like her mom, it's like, oh, kind of one of those situations of relying on your beauty to kind of be a trademark, and obviously people getting plastic surgery to perfect their look or something like that, and so she scarred up her face, Joker style actually, in particular, Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight. So that was kind of interesting. What was really interesting, and we find out her name is DeWilla Dent. It turns out Harvey Dent is her uncle. What was really interesting is like, oh, that lovable, that extremely loved ADA or something, which obviously shows that he's not DA yet in this universe, but also it also means he's not Two-Face yet. For Luke to say like, oh, beloved like that, it's like, oh, so, and once again, I love stuff like that because, you know, I'm crossing over to Marvel, like using it as an example, but like Marvel's Spider-Man for the PS4, there's so many of his villains that are established while others aren't, so it's always interesting to know which ones, because obviously, once again, it was like brought up earlier in this season where it's like, I was curious who Batman was, and some guy riddled me like the answer to, you know, kind of insinuating obviously that Riddler exists. We know potentially Freeze exists, Bane exists, Joker exists. So it's just interesting finding out like, oh, what villains exist in this continuity, which ones haven't been born yet. Who knows if they'll actually be born in this continuity. It's interesting stuff like that. But it's sad that basically she's going around and cutting up people's faces. And the thing is, I like that who does Kate turn to first during all of this is Mary, and Mary's just jumping to, because obviously Mary knows that, you know, Kate's Batwoman, but the fact of the matter is she's trying not to let her know that she knows, but it's like, oh, if you need me, like, oh, you're looking into it, and she even gives her excuses being like, oh, Kate, you're probably looking into this because of real estate investment stuff. It's like, and Kate's like, yeah, you're right. It's like, the fact of the matter is she's making an excuse to help, because, you know, because I even love that, like, you know, because, you know, Mary is an influencer, but obviously her influence kind of took a hit when, you know, Jacob was accused of killing Catherine. But the fact of the matter is, that's still kind of her world. So Kate made the best choice of like, oh, going to her first. But Kate was like, no, I'm good. She's like, if you ever need me, like my medical expertise and stuff, like I'm here. And it's just like, Kate's like, no, I'm good. Because truth be told is like, Mary doesn't realize it, but the thing is, Kate doesn't want to drag her sister into this. It's like what she does is dangerous. And the last thing she wants to do is get her sister mixed up in. I mean, that's a whole thing of a lane of things that Kate's dealing with in this episode. But she ends up getting Sophie's help, which that's a whole interesting thing. We'll kind of go through it all, but obviously Sophie and Batwoman work together to end up stopping DeWilla, you know, because she wanted to punish someone that was her best friend long ago, but for her it's like, oh, like the fact is, I'm gonna show the world who you really are. You'll thank me, because what this is all about is basically she's getting back at people who, well, this particular person was her best friend, and it's like, because she ended up getting forced to have plastic surgery to fix her scars. They're still there, but they aren't what they were before, because that was what she wanted her face to look like. But obviously it sucks that, you know, Ethan, which we know is actually Cartwright, ended up fixing her face, which is so interesting. I mean, because it actually makes sense in the grand scheme of things, because what is he doing the entire time? Trying to fix his son's deformities, and that's kind of his thing of like, you know, I mean, granted, her situation obviously is a deeply psychological thing, but in her mind it was like, my face was finally perfect, is what I wanted it to be. Miles can kind of accept himself for what he is, but he always covers up half his face with his hair, because his dad always did it. His dad made such a point of like, oh, like, I'm trying to, like, everything I'm doing is for you, and in actuality it's you're imposing your own will by being like, oh, my son is quote unquote a freak, and I don't want him to be treated like a freak. It's like, your son only feels like that because you should love him regardless and accept him, you know, scars and all, but you don't. Obviously that's a whole deep psychological issue on Cartwright's part anyway, but nevertheless, but luckily they were able to stop DeWilla. But, you know, an interesting byproduct of all of this is obviously the whole situation with, because, you know, at the beginning of the episode, Sophie and Kate were on top of the world. They were just happy and everything. And, you know, it's like Sophie's talking to Mary, and Kate's talking to Luke about the whole thing, and I even love her being like, "You're wrong," but she's like, "I can't believe those words are coming out of your mouth, asking if I got laid or something like that." I thought that was interesting. But the fact of the matter is, Luke kind of has to put a damper on her, happy days, because it's like, to be fair, you know why Bruce led the life that he did, because you couldn't get close to people, because this job, this way of living, this double life doesn't allow for potential happy life. I mean, obviously we see it's look at any other hero in the Arrowverse. Relationships are a hard thing. I mean, superheroes in general, but definitely just even using the Arrowverse, for example, having a relationship isn't the easiest thing. It comes with its complications, and the people you care about get dragged into it. Every superhero's kind of had to deal with. I mean, that's the whole point of wearing a mask and everything. So, but it's not even just because at first I didn't even think about that last episode. I think it's just because it's such a given with superhero stuff. But the fact of the matter, I mean, hell, I didn't even talk. I was thinking about it too. Like, literally, the previous episode of Supergirl literally dealt with this when Mr. Mixopedelik ended up helping Kara see what if Lena knew the truth, and literally what went down in that world as a byproduct of someone you know and care about knowing the truth about you, and then being a target because of it, so it being such a public thing of you and this superhero know each other, so it's that complicated situation. I mean, and it's so sad because, for Kate, it's that thing of it's it felt good to be with Sophie again, because it's despite how much time has passed, Sophie's always had a special place in her heart. Running into Sophie again after all these years, it solidified it again. I still love this woman, and it's sad. This was an opportunity to kind of be with her. It felt good, but now now even Kate tried to break things off, and even Sophie was like, oh, if you want to walk away, then walk away, but that's not the easiest thing, because obviously at the same time Sophie's mom shows up because she had heard about you're no longer with the Crows and stuff like that right now, and it's you're not even here for a motherly visit, you're here because you heard about the Crow situation, you heard about Tyler, you came to check on me and stuff like that. I'm fine. She's like, I don't want you to end up on the street under a bridge, there is a form of you can tell that she does care in her whole, but then it's also but Batwoman, Sophie sticking up for Batwoman and stuff like that. I'm more aligned with, I don't align with the Crow's way of seeing things. I don't align with the way the GCPD sees things, but I'm more aligned with Batwoman, and it's but she's a criminal, and it's you didn't feel that way about Batman. Yeah, but he aligns more with my, right, because he's not gay. So that turns into that whole thing, and for Sophie, she tried to look at the silver lining to this. It's I kind of have to keep this more secret, so this thing between her and Batwoman made even more sense. But for Batwoman, Kate has to be at the end of the day though, this mask, if you want to, I'll tell you right now who I am, but the moment I take this mask off, I become somebody, and obviously that becomes another lane to this whole situation. You're already keeping one secret, you're going to have to keep even more secrets upon that, so the fact of the matter is, you want to embrace who you are, and you can never do that if you're being with someone like me who has to constantly wear a mask. That's just not, and that's a lot aspect of your life you're always going to have to hide. I don't want to be part of the reason why you can't be you, essentially, that you have to hide this side of yourself, because you have to always hide who you're dating. It's oh yeah, I'm dating, I can't tell him, so it turns into that thing. So Sophie has some things to kind of figure out, so it's kind of a bummer that things kind of play out like this. Sad thing is, she ends up telling her mom, but her mom is just oh, why'd you wait till now to tell me? It's because I didn't want to see you look at me the way you do now. And she's and it's I'm sorry, but that's what disappointment looks like. And it's because it was never going to be an easy conversation. Her mom's just very steadfast in her own beliefs and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, sadly, all Sophie can do is be her and not shy away from that, and it's she's been kind of living because she's always been torn between, I got to put up this front, I want to be the person that people want me to be, who my parents want me to be, because she even talked about it. It's everything she's ever done in her life, no matter what she's done, there's always a part of her that's wondering, is my mom proud of me? And now this kind of throws a wrench in that. I think the same thing applies with her dad. I mean, it's just that whole thing that come in conversations. I don't know if her dad's still alive or not. But it's just, it hit, you can tell it hit. I mean, I think with anyone in that circumstances, it's going to hit you hard when your parent can accept you for you, it's that, it's very heartbreaking. And obviously it's not just a Sophie thing, obviously that's a real thing. So it gets a little sad, when you think about that. But And obviously you had the whole Mary situation, which, you know, the whole thing about, you know, secrets and stuff like that. Because, you know, Mary finds out, wait, you know who Batwoman is? And Alice is like, oh, you don't? Oh, sad. I guess she doesn't really trust you with all those secrets. But then it kind of, for Mary, it's like, wait, her sister knows. Granted, that wasn't really, it makes sense. But also for Mary, it's like, I'm her sister too. So it's like, it's kind of messed up that you would tell your psychopathic sister, not me. It's a whole complicated thing in itself. But the fact of the matter is, it wasn't really the way Mary might kind of envision. So she's kind of known about Kate for a while, but obviously, you know, Mary ends up, you know, it's like, you know, you can talk to me about anything, but, you know, Kate's still keeping up the pretenses of like, oh yeah, this is some aspect of like, you know, like this is like the real estate stuff that she's kind of dealing with. But she's like, okay, but she's like, you ever wonder, like, when you first came to me and I bandaged you up at the beginning, and the fact that you found out about my secret clinic, at no shape or form was I worried about you telling anyone, or you kind of, you know, chastising me, telling me all the ways this could kind of go wrong. She's like, I knew I can trust you to have my back on this situation, and hopefully one day you'll feel the same way too. And it's just like, Kate, just, you know, it makes her feel guilty, because it's like, once again, she wants to bring Mary into the fold, but then again, it's like, she literally dealt with this with Sophie. She doesn't want to get the people that she cares about most brought up in this, because it's like, if you, I mean, granted, Mary knows anyway, so it's a little different from Sophie's situation, where Sophie believed she had the idea first of like, oh, but then obviously that got proven wrong to her. But now it's still kind of a, you know, Mary's situation is a little different because she now knows, but it still could potentially be a threat, you know. So it's a complicated situation of like balancing that double life. There's always going to be, you know, there's always going to be things that kind of fall apart because of that. Other avenues to this episode, we had the whole Jacob situation, which obviously the dude he met in prison, his name's Reggie, did not piece it together. That's the dude who killed, quote unquote, killed Lucius. So basically he wants Jacob to kind of talk to a judge to get his, like, you know, situation kind of more up front in front of a judge, as like, hey, I protected you in prison, you kind of owe me your life. Initially Jacob's kind of like, no, that's not going to work because he killed Lucius Fox, but the lawyer's kind of threatening like, well, yeah, there's a lot of shady stuff about the Crows that we could bring to light. Hopefully it just stays a threat and doesn't become anything more. So, but Jacob looking into it, he's like, there's a lot of suspicious stuff around this circumstance of, like, you know, because apparently, like, Reggie's lawyer was talking about the fact is that he had gotten, like, kind of like coerced into a confession and stuff like that. But obviously it's like he talks to one of his crows about it, and it's like, oh, like, we handed him over to the GCPD, but at the same time Jacob's like, the cameras weren't really working at the time. It's just a little coincidental. Then there was also like a payment, and he was like, oh, the payment was just because when we were going after him there was some damage, so we were paying that back, restitution in that regard. But Jacob starts throwing out, you know, well, what if, like, there's and it was like, the dude's like, what? No, you actually think one of the Crows might be behind this. So now he's calling Sophie. It's so interesting. He's like, despite where our difference is right now, you are literally the only person I trust, because I've never, like, your loyalty, your trust has never been something I've always questioned. And like where we stand, this whole Batwoman thing, that's our opinions and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, you've always been an honorable person. So I'm curious, is Sophie going to answer his call? I mean, it's going to be a whole complicated thing, but it's like the Crows might not be as, not necessarily the answer that Jacob kind of initially thought they would be, and then were. So it's going to be interesting to see, like, is there, how much corruption is there within? I mean, to be fair, the GCPD literally has to deal with that all the time. Like, every time you turn around, there's corruption in GCPD. So it's like, I mean, should we really be too surprised? The Crows, once again, it's Gotham. There's a lot of corruption in Gotham. It's a lot, you know. So I'm curious to see, you know, what ends up becoming a product of that. You know, I didn't even talk about this earlier. I should have, when I brought up the whole, like, Dewilla situation of, like, it is interesting that people in that family, I mean, it might be like a psychological disposition that people in that family have, like the whole, like, I don't know, like the Face situation. It's like, well, her uncle, I mean, granted, he's not Two-Face in this universe, but he typically is, and for her to kind of have like a facial thing too, just kind of seems like, oh, that's, you know, it seems very particular. So I mean, granted, his was like I say, it seems like that psychological trigger is already there inside of their mind, and it being like they do have like a psychological issue that probably does like run throughout their family. It might be kind of a genetic thing, but it's just interesting because I've never heard much about Harvey's extended family, But regardless, like I said, I'm going on a tangent. But I was thinking about, I didn't bring that up, but circling back to it, so there's all of that, but at the same time, there's the whole situation with Alice dealing with the fact is they're trying to confront, Cartwright. She even got a therapist to kind of talk to, because she basically he was talking about the fact is like, well, when you're dealing with someone who caused you trauma, like it kind of takes you back to that age. So like saying that Alice is a little afraid, which Alice is like, no, I'm not afraid. But the fact of the matter is there is a part of her, like despite everything, even despite you being older, despite even you being in this powerful position, the thought of kind of confronting him makes you kind of turn back into that little girl that you were when he captured you and held you all those years, So, but the fact of the matter is the therapist had suggested like, oh, you need to kind of put a buffer between you, because if you confront him, he can like exploit that weakness. Like he can see it and kind of make you kind of small again to a certain extent. So you need kind of a buffer. And it's like, oh, thank you. She's like, if I wish we could make this a weekly thing, but can't have people knowing I'm alive. So we took care of that. It was kind of a bummer. But the fact of the matter is, Alice ends up taking this opportunity to look into what's her face, Dewilla, just because it's like, oh, you have a personal vendetta against him too. I thought it was going to be more so an actual proper team up. Turns out not to be the case. She just straight up just cut Dewilla's face off, which Dewilla was all too happy about. It's like, oh my God, yes. Which is so interesting. I mean, it's so interesting that this circle of things just has to deal with faces, because it's like Two-Face, Dewilla, Cartwright, Mouse. It's just interesting how that all kind of works out. I had looked it up because I was curious, because I just Googled like DC Comics Cartwright, and the first thing that popped up was Jane Doe. So I'm guessing like, which I'm assuming, because to be fair, they referenced this in Crisis on Infinite Earths episode 2, like Bruce from Earth 99 was like, oh, you can't be Jane Doe because she's in Arkham. So it's like, okay, so I guess maybe on this Earth, Jane Doe, it's, I guess Mouse is Jane Doe to a certain extent. Maybe that's what they're kind of setting up. I don't know. Because my initial thought was, because I knew the name Cartwright seemed familiar, so I was like, I initially thought it was Scarecrow. We'll get to that in a second. But the fact of the matter is, that was my earlier thoughts. But Jane Doe had popped up earlier in my mind. But I was just curious. I was like, okay. But I looked into it finally. I was like, okay. So I guess like they just changed Mouse from Jane Doe to John Doe, I guess, which is interesting considering the fact is that she is kind of just registered as a kind of a bit of a Jane Doe herself. Alice is, with the whole like being, quote unquote dead situation. But regardless, the fact of the matter is she showed up with Dewilla's face on. I mean, it was the best way to kind of get through, but also to catch him off guard. So, but that's like that. I thought it was going to be more of a teamwork type of situation, which it kind of was. It's just I wasn't expect you to rip her face off. Well, not rip, just slice her face off, but catch Ethan off guard and capture him. And she doesn't want to kill him. She wants to kind of basically make him suffer. Obviously, she also wants to find Mouse, which he's laughing maniacally. It's like, oh, I'll tell you exactly where Mouse is because of what he had set up ahead of time. Because it's like he's pumping Mouse full of gas because he's like, everything I'm doing is for your betterment. And it's like, once again, it's not. It's just his twisted, preconceived notions about like his own twisted way of helping his son. But at the end, we see that, oh, he's pumping his son full of fear toxins. And it's like, okay, also showing that Scarecrow exists in this universe. So I was like, okay, so that's really interesting. So once again, just showing you what villains exist and which ones don't. So, see what I mean? So that's fascinating. I'm curious to see what that ends up doing to Mouse. Mouse wasn't a, but I mean, it depends. I mean, Scarecrow's fear toxins it depends on what continuity, because certain continuities, like at least Gotham, he got so full pumped on his own fear toxins. That's what made him into Scarecrow. So what will be Mouse's final product? I mean, it probably won't, like when Alice finds him, he won't be the same. Like, granted, who knows like how long he was being pumped full of that toxin, who knows how long. So that the longer, obviously, like those have lasting effects. So what that necessarily look like, we'll ultimately have to wait to see where all this ultimately takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.